Now let's do something pretty common, which is we'll record some audio and then we'll also import some audio on a different track and we'll mix the two together. So first thing I'll do, I'll record a voiceover. Got my mic set up. I'm gonna record onto a mono channel. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. My audio looks good. I'm gonna hit record. Okay, here I go. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. All right, let me see how that came out. Going to zoom my timeline there. Come here, hit play. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. All right, so that sounds good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import some already existing audio rather than recording new audio. I'm just going to import a file. I'm going to import a music file. It's a common thing you might do for making music beds or things like that. So I'm going to come up here, and now a lot of times in most programs you might say open, but if you say open, what you're going to do is you're going to open in a new project. What we want to do is want to import some audio into this project. So we come down to import, and then we come over to audio. And what's going to pop up here is my window showing all my folders. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my music folder, and I have this song called Kickin' Mule, which I downloaded from the Library of Congress. This is a public domain piece of music, which is kind of important as a little side note. If you're using music, most music is copyrighted, so you got to want to be careful using copyrighted music. You can get yourself into trouble. If you're one of our G-Town programmers and you're creating something for air on G-Town Radio, G-Town Radio does have a music license, so you're okay there. However, if you were to take the thing you created and upload it to YouTube, you could get into trouble because the G-Town music license only covers things broadcast on G-Town Radio. That's why I decided for this tutorial to use a piece of public domain music. And I'm going to come over here and I'll hit play, you can hear it. All right, so we got some old-timey music there. All right, and when I imported it, as you'll see, it automatically imported it to its own track, and it's a stereo track. It's music, so you can see we got a left channel and a right channel as opposed to my mono voiceover. The other nice thing it does, you can see here, it brings the title in, all right, which is nice. I don't remember if I mentioned this, but you can actually name your tracks, which I'm going to do here. I'm going to just call this my voiceover track. So now I can see I got voiceover and here's my music. That comes in handy if you suddenly start adding tracks, right? If you've got a track and a track, right? And then suddenly you've got all these tracks and you're trying to remember which is which. It helps if you have titles over here. If they all just say audio track, it doesn't do you much good. I'm going to get rid of these tracks. I'm going to select that one and then come down here, hold shift, select them both. You can see they're both blue, and then I can say tracks, remove tracks, boom. Now I'm back to where I was. Okay, so now I got my voiceover here and I've got my music track here. But if I come up here, brought forth in this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty. Okay, so right, that doesn't work because the music's too loud. I also have some extraneous audio at the front here on my voiceover. There is also a little bit of an intro to this song by the musician here. So I'm going to want to remove that. I'm going to want to remove that. The other thing I need to do is I need to adjust my levels. So let's talk about all that. All right, so first thing I want to do, I'm going to come in here, zoom in, And I just want to get rid of all this audio that I don't need. All right, I can just cut that out. All right, and then same thing here. This is the person talking. All right, I'm gonna solo this. By the way, solo means just listen to that track.
Family playing the kicking mule with a tenor banjo lead.
All right, there's the guy's intro. And you can see when I hit solo, this grays out, and also the mute button lights up. So each track has a mute and a solo. So if mute turns the track off, solo turns just that track on. They both kind of do the same thing, but solo is handy if you have like 10 tracks of audio. You don't have to go through and hit mute on each one. You can just hit solo on the one you want to listen to. All right, so now let me come up here and take that, and I'll get rid of that. Okay, so now I've gotten rid of all my extra. All right, I have just music there, and I'll solo this one. 7 years ago. Okay, so now I have my voiceover here, I have my music here, but I don't want them to start at exactly the same time. So here's what I'm gonna do. Let me zoom out a little. I'm gonna take my time shift tool, and I'm gonna bring my voiceover down here a little bit. Let's see. Actually, first, let's listen to this music. Let's find a good spot to put it.
Nick dinner all over the ground. Skippered in the meat was 9 foot deep, and a grain plot walking all around. The biscuit in the oven with a bacon.
So this brings up a good part. Okay, so there's singing going on here. So I definitely don't want to put my voiceover here, because what happens?
I went down to the Huckleberry picnic dinner all
7
over
years
the ground.
ago, our
Skippered in the
fathers
meat
bought
was 9
forth. Right, you got two voices talking at the same time, and that'll drive you insane. So we definitely don't want to put it here. So this is the singing part. This part over here is just the music. So what I will do, and actually it looks like my voiceover timed out well. It's right about the same length of the instrumental part of this track. So I'm going to put it there. Now if I go back to the beginning. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent. I might scooch this down a little bit more. I want to give myself a little more time. Let me zoom back in a little bit. All right, so I got a little bit of music starting, and then I have my voiceover happening. 7 years. But I still have this problem where the music is really loud and I can barely hear the voiceover. Well, there's two things I can do. I can either raise this, the sound of my voice, or I can lower the music, or possibly a little bit of both. So let's take a look here. Let's just... 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Now, if you look at the meters, the playback is kind of low. Let's watch that again. I'm just going to put it right here. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Conceived. You see where that was? It was only coming up to about 3 on the meters here. So what we can probably do first off is make this louder, which each track has its own volume control here. So the simplest way to do it is just bump this up a little bit. There we go. All right, let's try it at +2. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that... All right, so it's a little better. See if we can move it up here. So let's try +. Years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition... Okay. Well, let me try... This continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent. Right, so. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on. All right, so I increased the gain to +6. Oh, our fathers brought forth on this continent. And that looks like a good level there. Okay, so now if I unmute this. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent. So that's better, but this is still too loud. So I can do the opposite down here. I can bring this down a little bit. So what if I go -6 on this? 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. All right, so that's a little better balance. So I increased this 6 decibels up, this down 6 decibels. So now there's 12 decibels of difference between these two things, and it sounds... 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
I went down to the Huckleberry Picnic.
Look at that, and I timed it out really well that it ends right before the singing starts. Not too shabby. So a couple of housekeeping things, though. What I would like to do is, now if I come down here, let me get rid of time shift, go to my selection tool, and I'm going to zoom right in here. See that little dot there? There's like a little click. That's probably from when I stopped recording. That's probably the sound of my mouse click. So first thing I want to do is I want to delete that. You know what? I'm just going to, just to make sure nothing shifts, I'm just going to say, all right, make that silent. So that's a little better. So that little click is gone. And are created equal.
I went down to the Huckleberry Picnic, dinner all over the ground.
All right, but another thing I notice is you can hear where the recording cuts out, because even though it's quiet at the end, there's a little bit of a hiss going on. To kind of soften that, I'm going to do a fade. I'm going to fade this out. And that's really easy to do. You can do fade ins and fade outs very easily. All right, so I'm just going to take here where the end of my talking is, and I'm going to select all the way to the end of the clip. When that yellow line lights up, means I've got the end of that segment. And then if I come up here to effects menu, these are all different effects you can use, and they have fade in and fade out. Actually, you can see they're in alphabetical order: A, B, C, D, E, F. Fade in, fade out. So if I hit fade out, now if I play this, I'm going to mute the music because you'll be able to hear it a little better. Are created equal. Okay, it slowly fades out. Let me undo that fade one step. There we go. Now let me mute that. Equal. Okay, so that's without the fade. You hear how it just cuts off. You hear that? Now if I redo my fade. Equal. All right, to hear that gradual, that hiss slowly fades out at the end. And then if I turn my music back on, and are created equal.
I went down to the Huckleberry Picnic, dinner all over the ground.
Okay, it's a much smoother transition. Okay, so there's a fade. You could also do a fade in. Why don't we do that? So I don't like that the music, if I go all the way back to the beginning here, cutting on. So what I'll do is I'll come down here, select that track. I got my selection tool, and I will just select that. And actually you'll be able to actually see the fade on the waveform here. Because this was all silence, it's kind of hard to see the actual fade. But now I'll do a fade in on this music, and you'll really be able to see it fade in on the waveform. So if I come here, I click fade in. All right, now you can see it slowly ramps up. Okay. And what it's doing, the reason it's stopping is because I have this selection active. So when it's playing, it's just going to play this section that I have selected. Now if I deselect, 407 years ago, okay, so you hear how it fades in. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
I went down to the Huckleberry Picnic, dinner all over the ground.
pretty straightforward stuff, right? So we did a fade in, fade out. One thing with these fades, let me undo that fade. Let me go back a couple. All right. So the length of the fade will be the length of whatever you select. So let me zoom in a little bit here. If we want a longer fade, you have to do a longer selection. Okay, and now if I do a fade in, right, it takes a lot longer to fade in. If I do a shorter selection, if I just, and then do fade in, it's just a real, it'll do a quick fade. Okay, and then another reason that's important is if you notice there is this little bit of silence at the front end. So that silence is included in the fade. So if I really want this to be a true fade, if I want the music to fade in from nothing, I need to shorten up this selection and just fade starting from here where the music starts. All right, and I'm gonna make this a little longer. So I'm gonna go from there to there. And then fade in. All right, and now you can see it starts at total silence. 7 years ago. Okay. So now just to finish this up, why don't we fade the other side out? I'm gonna unmute this and we'll zoom back out. Oh, I'm zooming in. I keep doing that. Zoom out. I'll go a little further. So we've got a little bit of music comes in. Oh, you know what? I forgot to, let me redo that fade first. All right, so let's have our music fade in. Let me zoom to make sure that I am not clipping the front end of the music here. There we go. All right, so we got that. I can zoom out a little bit. And I'm gonna have it come to full volume right there. I do my fade in. Okay, so now that's fading in. 7 years ago. Now, what I'll do is, we've got this big long piece of music. I don't want this piece of music to go on forever. So let me come down to the end and zoom in and find a spot for the song to end.
I went down to the Huckleberry picnic, dinner all over the ground. Skippered and the meat was 9 foot deep, and a green pot walking all around. The biscuit all around. The biscuit in the oven with the bacon.
Right about there, he says, walking around.
The meat was 9 foot deep, and a green pot walking all around. The biscuit in the oven with the bacon.
Okay, and so you can kind of see right about here is where he stops. So let's kind of zoom in here. And let me just see.
The biscuit in the oven with the bacon. The biscuit in, the biscuit. The biscuit in, the biscuit in.
So this looks like where he starts talking again. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it right there. So I can come up and go to clip boundaries, hit split. Okay, and then I can keep zooming in when I want to zoom out. All right, just to make sure I got the right thing, I'm gonna pull that out of the way. Double click with my selection tool. You can see if I can double click there, double click there, and then I'm just gonna cut that out, make it go away. And then I will zoom back in.
Skippered and the meat was 9 foot deep, and a green pot walking all around.
Although there's a little bit of a breath at the end there, but what I'm gonna do is I'll put the fade on and see if we can still hear it. So might not be noticeable.
A green plot walking all around.
Still a little, can still kind of hear it. So let me zoom back in again. Keep zoom out. All right, so it's probably, that little bump there is probably the sound of him breathing. So I'm just going to cut that off.
Round.
And then fade this.
All around.
All right, that sounds much better. Gonna zoom out. Okay, come back to the beginning. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
I went down to the Huckleberry picnic, dinner all over the ground. Skippered in the meat was 9 foot deep and a green plot walking all around.
There we go. We got to fade in, we got to fade out, we got some music. There's more stuff we can do to this, but for right now I'm going to stop there. So just to give you the basic idea of having a couple of different tracks and having different levels on each track. And then we'll get more complicated in a later video.